Hello there, and welcome to this live chat in honor of International Polar Bear Day. My name is Thea Bechshoft, and I'm a scientist with Polar Bears International. Now, if you've joined us previously for other webcasts, you will note that this one is a little bit different in that I am the only panelist. Plus, I have my colleague KT helping behind the scenes, so she may chime in here and there. I'm going to share with you some of the most frequently asked questions that I get about polar bear moms and cubs. But other than that, the content of this chat is up to you and your polar bear questions. Now, I personally love a good Q&A session, so don't be afraid to keep the questions coming. You can submit them either on our Facebook page or via our Tundra Connections page on our website, and then KT will forward them to me. So depending on your questions, the duration of this live chat will be 30 to 60 minutes. Now, about International Polar Bear Day. International Polar Bear Day is a day that we celebrate every year on February 27th and during the week leading up to that day. This year, our focus is on the most vulnerable polar bears of them all, moms and cubs. So right now, polar bear moms and their newborn cubs are snuggled together in snow dens across the Arctic. Polar bear cubs are born in the winter in dens hidden under the snow. And when they're born, they are blind. They weigh about ½ a kilo or 1 pound. So they are tiny, like they fit within the palm of my hand. Yeah. And they only have this light layer of fur or fuzz even to protect them from the cold. So the families, they remain in the den under the snow until spring, when the cubs are finally large enough to survive the harsh outside conditions that you find in the Arctic. So obviously, denning is the most vulnerable time in a polar bear's life. And in this warming Arctic, where polar bears just face enormous challenges, the survival of every single cub is critically important. So this International Polar Bear Day, which is Saturday, February 27th, but also this whole week, we invite you to join us in protecting moms and cubs. So I'm going to get us started with a great frequently asked polar bear question. So over the years, I've done a fair bit of outreach with Polar Bears International, but also when I was a student, when I've been working as a polar bear guide on ships going north, and on my Facebook page called Polar Bear Questions. Now, Polar Bear Questions was actually something that I was inspired to start when I first started getting involved in volunteering for Polar Bears International and their fall tundra connections. So yeah, like I said before, I love a good Q&A session. So if you have polar bear questions, whether they're about moms and cubs or anything else polar bear-y, don't hold back. All right? And this session, this live chat, like I said, it's a little bit less formal. So for once, I actually brought notes. How about that? I took the questions from my Polar Bear Questions page, the ones that I've been asked so many times, and so I wanted to share them here with you. Yeah, so let's dive right in, because this one I really like. Okay, I like them all. I really like this one though. So the question is, how can you tell if a polar bear is pregnant? Right? In a lot of animals, it's really easy to tell if you have an adult, whatever, female of this species, to tell whether she's pregnant or not. However, polar bears are quite big mammals, right? And their cubs, like I was talking about before, they weigh 500 to 800 grams, about a pound, when they're born. So the mom, when she gives birth to this cub, she's actually upwards of 800 times bigger than her newborn cub, which is mind-blowing, right? I mean, the sheer size difference and the fact that she doesn't actually lie on top of it or, you know, squish it somehow in the tiny den where they're cooped up together is just amazing. Polar bear moms are very attentive because they have to be, right? Anyway, because the cub is so small or so much smaller than the mom, you can't actually, you know, you can't just look at a bear and tell whether she's pregnant or not. Even in the late fall, when the pregnant female is about to enter her maternity den to give birth, you won't be able to tell if she's pregnant or not just by looking at her. There is something that you can look for, though. It's kind of a telltale sign, but it's not going to help you 100%. But that's because you can look at how fat the bear is. How round is she? How chubby is she? We also call that the bear's body condition. So if she's in really good body condition, there is a higher chance that she is pregnant, right? Because pregnant polar bears, all polar bears need to eat, right? And they need to put a good layer of body fat to stay healthy and to be able to survive the leaner months. But pregnant polar bears need to eat even more because they need to build up the needed fat reserves for surviving the denning period. So actually, for a pregnant polar bear, it's not unusual, if they are good at hunting and if they have access to seals, for them to double or even triple in weight before denning, right? And you know, those are beautiful bears. Round, healthy, able to give birth to really healthy cubs that are a lot more resilient, and they're able to actually feed them to nurse them. Because when they're in the den, that body fat that the polar bear female has built up in the months before, she needs to live off of that herself, but she also needs to feed her cubs using that body fat, literally turning her body fat into milk and nursing the cubs so that they could get bigger and, you know, big and healthy cubs that can actually survive once they get outside of the den. Yeah. So you know, you can look for, is it fall? Is it an adult female that's alone, meaning she doesn't have cubs already? Then there is, you know, a possibility that it could be a pregnant female. However, even for people who've been working with polar bears for years and years, and well, decades actually, it can be really difficult to tell the difference at a distance between a pregnant female or a younger male bear with great seal hunting skills, right? They can look basically the same at a distance. So it's not a foolproof way, but it's, you know, it's a good way of guessing whether this bear is pregnant or not. There's actually been, in humans, for example, we have pregnancy tests, and there are researchers working to develop pregnancy tests for polar bears. However, it's not quite as straightforward with the bears because they have what we call delayed implantation. So the egg is fertilized during mating season in the spring, but it doesn't actually implant and start growing until the fall that same year. So because of this delayed implantation, the pregnancy-related hormones in polar bears, they're just not as easy to interpret as they are with humans, for example. So, and they also have something called pseudo pregnancies, which just is a whole different ballgame. And yeah, like I said, researchers are trying to figure out how to do a pregnancy test, so to speak, for polar bears, but we are not there yet. But it would be amazing to have, because that would give us a much better indication of, you know, how big a percentage of adult females are actually pregnant, and how many of the adult females that are pregnant actually successfully produce cubs, right? That would be amazing information to have. All right, I see a couple of questions. That's awesome. Let's see. Dale is asking, how long do they stay in the den before they come out with the cubs? So the polar bear female, she will make her snow den in October-ish, plus minus a month. Everything about this is plus minus a month, yeah. But let's say in October, then she gives birth to her cubs around New Year's, give or take, and then they'll emerge as a family unit in March, early mid-March. So they're in the den together for about 3 months. Yeah. And during that time, those tiny cubs, the ones that are like fit within the palm of my hand, they actually grow into, well, tiny versions of their mom, right? But they grow from about 500 grams to 10 to 15 kilos. Yeah, and they learn to walk and they put on a little bit of fat, and hopefully then they're able to follow their mom outside of the snow den, follow her onto the sea ice, and yeah, learn how to become a successful polar bear. Ooh, Carla is asking about the necklace. Thank you, Carla, for noticing. I really like it too. I bought it from a local artist in BC in Canada, so I'm afraid we don't have it for sale. Let's see, other questions. Daniel is asking, this is a good question. Which are the best universities to make a PhD related to polar bears? So a lot of people seem to think that you have to live in polar bear country to be able to study polar bears. That is not so. Yeah. Like my PhD, for example, I did in Denmark. I had field work in Greenland, but I did it in Denmark, right? So as long as you have somewhere where you can go on field work, or you have a data sharing agreement with someone who's been collecting data from the field, you can do a polar bear PhD anywhere, right? That being said, there are some polar bear research groups that are really well established. And, you know, there is a lot of knowledge in those groups that will really help you as you begin your PhD, right? So that's always preferable. So, I mean, yeah, there are multiple groups in, well, all the polar bear nations, of course. So if you're looking for a great university, a great country to do your polar bear PhD in, I would look for Denmark or Greenland. These are the 5 polar bear nations, right? Denmark or Greenland, Canada. Canada has 2/3 of the world's polar bears, so there's a lot of polar bear research going on there. The US, specifically in Alaska, and in Russia, especially if you speak Russian, that would be amazing. And then in Norway, or at UNIS, the University Center in Svalbard, right? Those are really good places to start looking if you want to do a polar bear PhD. Let's see. Vanessa is asking, are you seeing decreases in fertility, reproduction rate, driven by reductions in food supply? So we are seeing that polar bear females, they need to put on a certain amount of weight to be able to actually go through with the pregnancy. In the fall, if the female isn't fat enough, if her body condition isn't high enough, there is a significant risk of her not actually denning, but either reabsorbing or aborting the fetus, because she simply does not have the body resources that she needs to go through successfully with the pregnancy, right? So we are seeing that polar bears in low body condition and bad body condition that are too skinny, they do not have cubs. But also we're seeing that the females, even though they have cubs, skinnier females will give birth to fewer cubs smaller cubs and, cubs that aren't, well, they're more likely to die once they get outside of the den because they're just not as hardy, they're not as resilient because they haven't been fed the way, they haven't been fed the optimal amount of milk, so they just don't have that layer of body fat to sustain them when they get outside in the cold. So, I mean, yeah, we are seeing smaller and fewer cubs, and it is tied to the body condition of the females. All right. Let's see. Oh, this is a great question. Is the famed hybrid polar grizzly bear real? So these are either, this is Tony asking, these are either called pisleys or growlers, depending. Are they real? Yes, they are absolutely real. So polar bears and grizzly bears are quite closely related, evolutionarily speaking, and they can actually still interbreed, and even their offspring is fertile, right? So yeah, they can absolutely interbreed. Now there was a couple of, well, what is it, 5 years ago or so, all of a sudden it seemed that there were hybrids everywhere, but it turned out when researchers looked into it that it was actually in a fairly contained area that there, a lot of these hybrids were being seen, and they were all initiated by a polar bear female who apparently really liked grizzly bear males, right? so it was a very contained area, and it was really based on this one bear. So although these hybrids do exist, we don't see a lot of them just yet. However, as the sea ice is retreating, polar bears are spending more time on the coastline, right, waiting for the sea ice to come back. And as the world is warming up, we're seeing that grizzly bears are moving further north, especially the young grizzly bears, the young males, when they're setting out to find their own territory, they'll move further north. And that, of course, makes for more opportunities of the two meeting up, potentially even during mating season. So, I mean, we could be seeing more, excuse me, more hybrids in the years to come, but yeah, we'll see what happens. Do polar bears, this is the second part of his question, do polar bears interact with other animals much? That's a good question. I think polar bears are willing to interact with most other species, meaning that they're willing to eat them, right? I think you could easily say that. However, there are very few species that I know of that would voluntarily seek out the company of a polar bear, right? There are anecdotes about Arctic foxes following polar bears around because they like to eat the leftovers when the polar bear has caught a seal. But yeah, I don't know. I can't remember having seen too much of that. Polar bears interacting with other species. No. They're quite the solitary animal, and there aren't too many other animals living out on the sea ice where the polar bears prefer to be. Let's see. Dina is asking, can polar bears abort cubs if they have high stress levels too? I don't think anyone has actually looked into this, but yeah, I would certainly think so. If the stress levels were high enough, not if it was an acute stressor. Like I don't think, if they were scared for 5 minutes or a half hour, I don't think they would abort the cubs. It's not like that. But if they were chronically stressed, so stressed at a very high level for a long period of time, there is a risk for sure that the body would not be able to or would not be sending the right hormonal signals for the bear to go through with the pregnancy. Mm-hmm. Let's see, one more. Carla is asking, what is a koi? That's a good question. It's one of the acronyms that we throw around a lot, and not everyone knows what it is. So thank you for asking. Yeah, a koi is short for cub of the year. Yeah, so it really just means that this is a cub that was born this year. Yeah, those are the tiny ones, the really cute ones, to be honest. Yeah. Yeah. Let's see. We also, we're trying to not use koi as much, but to say cub, meaning the little ones, the first years, and then 2-year-olds to mean the older cubs, right? But if you hear koi, it just means cub of the year. All right. These are all awesome questions, by the way. Thank you for asking. Carla is asking, what are the best books about polar bears? And I am right in front of my bookshelf, so I'm just going to get 3 of them. Yeah. Now it depends on what in particular you're interested in, right? Let's see. Actually, I'm going to get 4 of them. Here we go. It depends what area you're interested in, what topic about polar bears. But if you're looking for general polar bear books, right? Then first of all, we have this one. I've taken off the cover, so it's kind of hard to see, but it is called Polar Bears. There you go. Polar bears and a complete guide to their biology and behavior. And it's written by, whoops, I don't know if you can see that. It's written by Andrew DeRoche, who is actually the professor of one of the really great polar bear research groups in Canada. So I really recommend this. It's a great book. I bring it every time I go north, and especially if I'm guiding, because it has so much good information, and it's just a great resource, especially if you're not connected to the internet and people are asking you polar bear questions. Yeah. Let's put it down here. Then we have this one, Polar Bears. Whoops. And the Natural History of a Threatened Species. And that one is by Ian Sterling. I don't think I've met anyone who knows as much about polar bears as Ian does. He has been studying polar bears for, I don't even want to guess how many decades, but at least 40 years. And what he doesn't know about polar bears is not worth including in this book. So I fully recommend this one too. Yeah. And then I have a couple of books for the younger polar bear fans. One of them is this one. It's from National Geographic Kids, Mission Polar Bear Rescue. It's really good. There are different, different activities, and you meet different polar bear researchers from all over the world, and it's a fun little book. And then the final one, which I was a consultant on, so I'm not completely impartial, is this one, Science Comics, about polar bear survival on the ice. And to be honest, I think, or it's a comic book is what I'd call it in Danish. I know it looks like it's only for kids, but I assure you it's for adults too, because it's really funny. Yeah. So those are the 4 main polar bear books that I would recommend just off of the top of my head. All right. Let's see. Right. Sorry, I'm trying to figure out how to pronounce your name. Margarita, I think. I don't know if the following has. Is it true that they are spending more time in the sea, perhaps unfortunately drowning, even though they are such good swimmers? That is true. So climate change has a lot of different effects on sea ice. There is less sea ice, but it's also thinner and the sea ice that we still have is more scattered than it used to be, right? And because the sea ice is more scattered and polar bears need this sea ice platform to be able to hunt seals, they need to swim more than they used to. If you look at this is scattered sea ice. Beautiful, but not very good if you prefer to travel on top of the sea ice, right? So polar bears have to swim more. And actually, there was just a paper that was released today, I think, showing that polar bears, let's see, I wrote it down here because it was just really interesting. Yes, that polar bears, they actually have to swim now 3 or 4 times more than they would have to if the sea ice cover was optimal, if it was as it used to be, right? 3 to 4 times more. And for polar bears, they are, like you say, polar bears are strong swimmers. They're not that fast, but they're very strong swimmers, and they can swim for a long time. But it actually costs them a lot more energy to swim than it does to walk on top of the sea ice. And so, you know, it's not just that they're having to swim and that, you know, it's cold in the water. They have to protect themselves so they don't die from the cold exposure, but they also spend a lot more calories, a lot more energy when they have to swim instead of walk on top of the sea ice. The other thing is that, you know, as the sea ice gets more scattered, the waves can get bigger. Because when you get the wind, there's just a bigger momentum because they can actually get to the water instead of just the surface of the sea ice. And so we're seeing that waves in the Arctic in some places are getting bigger. And polar bears, they're good at swimming, but they're not really made to handle waves, right? And so that increases the risk of them drowning when they're swimming. Good question. Daniel is asking, what is the mean temperature of a polar bear? Yeah, so incredibly, it's the same as you and me. Yeah, so it's about 37 degrees Celsius. I do not remember what that is in Fahrenheit. KT? What is the standard mammal temperature in Fahrenheit?
Ooh, I should be Googling this. 97, 98 degrees Fahrenheit is our...
Okay.
I'll Google that. I'm pretty sure that's right.
All right. All right. So polar bears are mammals. They're marine mammals, and their core temperature is the same as it is for most other mammals, right? So in Celsius, that would be around 37 degrees. Now, polar bears, of course, live in an environment that is quite a bit colder than what, you know, it is here in Denmark, for example, or probably also in most of the places where you guys are living. The way that polar bears stay warm is partly their fat. So fat is a good insulator, right? And they can pack up, you know, they can pack on a lot of kilos when they have to. And that's a really good insulator, especially when they're... But what also really helps them is their fur. Polar bear fur is just amazing. It's 2 different kinds of fur. So underneath you have the... Oh, let's see. Yes, so the temperature in Fahrenheit is about 98, 99. So you were right, Katie. Let's see. Yes, polar bear fur. 2 kinds of fur. Underneath, if you like dig a little bit, you'll see that there are these shorter, curly, softer hairs, which you can look at it as wool or like under fur. They're about like the length of my thumb or so. And those are like your nice warm sweater that you put on. They're very good at trapping heat. And then on top of that, you have the guard hairs, which are what you see in this picture. The woolly fur is underneath, but the guard's hair are covering them. Just like a good, what do you call it, a shell jacket, like a rain jacket, a wind jacket. It's protecting those softer hairs underneath and helping keeping the heat trapped. So that's how polar bears can actually stay with a core temperature of 37 degrees, even though they live in an area where the temperature often well, at least during the dark months, drops down to minus 40 or lower. It's quite impressive. Polar bears are supremely adapted to living in the high Arctic and to hunting seals and to living on the sea ice. They are what we call specialists. So they are incredibly good at catching seals and living that polar bear life. And this is really beneficial as long as we have that sea ice platform, and as long as the Arctic is the same way that it was when they spent hundreds of thousands to millions of years adapting to living there. However, as the high Arctic is changing, that means that this specialist, the polar bear, is that much more at risk. Because if you're super specialized, it's really hard to change. It's almost impossible to adapt. And if you have to adapt, it's going to take hundreds of thousands to millions of years to do that. And this is why polar bears, they can't just simply adapt as the sea ice is changing, because the sea ice is changing so incredibly rapidly that polar bears, evolutionarily, they don't have a chance of following along, right? You can't change a specialist like the polar bear and everything that they are, all the skills that they have, their physiology, you cannot change that so significantly in the course of 50 to 100 years. It's just not possible. All right, let's see. Carl is asking, do polar bears hunt for fish? So generally not, no. Hunting for fish is a brown bear specialty, right? Especially in areas where you have the what do you call it? The rivers full of salmon and whatnot. But for polar bears, not really. They're just not fast enough in the water, and they don't have any areas where you have, that same situation with a lot of fish coming down a river at a given point in time. However, polar bears are curious, they are opportunistic, and they will happily try and eat most anything that looks interesting, right? So if a polar bear sees some fish that are caught in a little tidal pool, for example, as the water retreats at low tide, and there are a couple of fish that are caught in a little pool on the shore, of course the bear is going to try and eat them, right? It wouldn't make sense to not do that because it's free food and it's right there. So with polar bears, you have a lot of anecdotes about them eating anything you can think of almost, right? Because they need a lot of food and they're curious, and yeah, so they will eat fish, but it's not a staple in their menu in any way at all. Yeah. All right, let's see. You know what, actually, I think I'm going to do one of the other polar bear questions. I mean, one of my polar bear questions, right? So just taking it back to the moms and cubs, one of the questions I get really often is, how many cubs do polar bear females have over the course of a lifetime? Because that's, of course, a really important question for understanding some of the challenges that we have to polar bear conservation. Polar bears have a very slow reproductive rate, and that makes them extra vulnerable in that it takes the population a long time to grow or to recover from any losses. So polar bear females, I think there was actually a question about this also. Polar bear females, they will start breeding when they're around 4 or 5 years old, and the males generally will start a year later, around the age of 6. So theoretically, Both males and females can successfully breed throughout their adult life. However, they rarely do that after they reach the age of 20. So, in other words, a polar bear will be reproductively active an average of about 15 years, right? Like I talked about before, they mate in the spring, and then in the fall, or in the winter, sorry, in the snow den, she gives birth to 1 or 2 cubs, sometimes 3, but we're seeing that less and less as the bears are skinnier and just not able to support 3 cubs. So the female and the cubs, they emerge from the den, and then they hang out as a family group for 2 to 2.5 years. And as long as the polar bear female is with her cubs, she's not going to mate again, right? So all in all, this means that an adult polar bear female, she only has a new litter, she only produces a new cub or 2 every 3 years, right? So now for the great math sum up. So she typically has about 5 litters, and each of them consists of 1 or 2 cubs over the course of her life, right? So that would be 5 to 10 cubs over the course of her life. But this is, of course, only if everything goes well, right? Like we talked about before, she must be fat. She must be in good body condition. Otherwise, the mating might happen, but not the pregnancy. And if you add to that the fact that cub mortality in polar bears can be incredibly high, like upwards of 50% in some cases, you can really see why polar bear population numbers can only grow quite slowly. Yeah. All right. By the way, thank you so much for all your excellent questions. I really appreciate it. This hour is just flying by, at least on this side of the screen. Hope it's the same for you. All right, let's see. Oh, there was one here. How long are polar bear claws and teeth? That's from Carla. So I actually have here, whoops, let's see. This is a replica of a polar bear claw. And I know it's hard to really see size when you're doing it on the screen like this, but if you look here, you can see it's kind of sort of, it's a little bit longer than my thumb. So that would be like 5 or 6 centimeters. Polar bear claws also perfectly adapted to helping the polar bear live in the high Arctic and to eating seals, because I don't know if you can tell, but that is a pointy claw, very sharp. Quite short also, but very sharp and really good for digging into slippery seals and dragging them onto the sea ice before they can slip away into the water. And I want to, maybe this is why you asked, I don't know, but I have here, whoops, this tiny little polar bear skull. Hang on. So, okay. In my master's thesis, I worked with 800 polar bear skulls or so. So I've had my fair share of polar bear skulls in hand, and I can tell you quite confidently that this is the biggest polar bear skull I have ever seen, right? Like now it's right next to my head. You can see it is huge, right? So this is from, it's a replica, but it's from an adult male polar bear. So what was the question? How long are polar bear teeth? Yes. So I'm guessing you're thinking about the canine teeth, these 4 big teeth at the corners. Those are the ones that are really good also for grabbing seals. And they are, let's see, they're a little bit shorter than the, actually, they're about the same length as the claw, actually. But you have to think about it when you're looking here. That, you know, obviously, this is a skull, so you don't have the, what do you call it in English? Around your teeth. KT?
Like the
The
gum?
gum? Just the
Yeah.
gum. Yeah. All right. Right. So in a polar bear, you would have, you'd have the lip and you'd have the gum. So you wouldn't actually be able to see this entire tooth. Like you'd be able to, it would still be a big and scary tooth, but it would look a little bit shorter than it does right here, right? And so because this is a replica, its teeth are reasonably healthy. But if this was like a skull from a real male adult polar bear, oftentimes they will have cracked or chipped or broken canines because hang on, during mating season, the adult males will be fighting for access to the females, and sometimes that actually ends up with them hurting their teeth, like breaking them, or yeah, it can look incredibly painful, right? Here you see two bears. Hang on, I'm just going to put this on the floor. Here you see two bears sparring. We call this play fighting because these two are not actually fighting over a female. This is in the fall, and they're just play fighting, like they're practicing for when it's go time in the spring, right? So they're practicing their moves, and it looks, I wouldn't want to be a part of this, even though it's play or whatever you want to call it. But this is how they also fight in the springtime, except when they do it in the springtime, there's usually a lot more scarring and a lot more red because they do actually do damage to one another. All right, let's see here. You know what? Let's see. Hang on. I want it to, let's find it here. Before it gets too late, I do want to talk a little bit about how we can help protect polar bears. So I appreciate all your questions, but I do want to get this in too before it's too late. So polar bears, like I mentioned a couple of times, they need the sea ice as a platform for hunting seals. And without sea ice, they won't have energy. They won't have access to this energy-rich prey that otherwise keeps them healthy, right? So if you don't have any sea ice, you don't have any polar bears. And we have to protect the Arctic sea ice. And in addition to being essential for people and animals, including the polar bear, in the north, it also plays an essential role in keeping our climate stable around the entire world, right? And there is this way of thinking about climate change that I really like, and I'd like to share it with you because maybe you find it helpful too. So Katie, I was wondering, can I get you to play the heat trapping blanket video?
Yes. Here we go.
Climate change is already affecting some populations of polar bears. Since we get most of our energy from fossil fuels, we are producing huge amounts of carbon dioxide. You see, regular amounts of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere act like a blanket around the Earth, trapping heat and keeping our planet at a stable temperature. However, when we burn fossil fuels like coal, oil, and natural gas for energy, we pump rampant amounts of carbon dioxide into the atmosphere. This buildup thickens the blanket, trapping too much heat, disrupting the climate, and melting Arctic sea ice.
Right. So I find this heat trapping blanket metaphor really helpful for thinking about climate change and understanding what it is that we have to do to, get things back on track. So obviously, to save sea ice and protect polar bears and improve conditions for people around the world, we have to reduce the risks, right? And the best way to do this is to reduce our fossil fuels, because when we burn fossil fuels like coal or oil or natural gas for energy, we release more and more carbon dioxide into the atmosphere. And like the video said, the atmosphere is like this blanket that surrounds the Earth, and normally it helps keep our world at a stable, livable temperature. But every time we add extra carbon dioxide into the atmosphere, it's like we're thickening this blanket. It's just making it harder for heat to escape. And this extra heat just becomes trapped under the blanket. It warms up our world, it disrupts our climate, And for polar bears, of course, what it's doing is melting the sea ice, right? And again, if you don't have any sea ice, you don't have any polar bears. So fortunately, it is not too late. All is not doom and gloom. Yeah, we can still actively do something about this. And I wanted to share that. That's why I wanted to share it now. So I'm sure that you guys know this before we have to say goodbye in about 15 minutes, right? So KT, if you could play the actions video.
Future generations of people and polar bears depend on the decisions and plans that we make today. The key to getting the climate back to functioning the way it should and to preserving a future for polar bears across the Arctic is to move away from using fossil fuels for energy altogether. The most important thing we can do is vote with the climate in mind to let our leaders know we support a swift transition to renewable energy sources. In the meantime, we can directly participate in and learn more about our local and regional renewable energy options. We can all make a difference outside our own households by influencing where our energy comes from. We hope you leave here feeling inspired and return home to leverage your voice and your influence, because together we can make sure that polar bears roam the Arctic sea ice for generations to come.
Thank you. So the important message here is that we can all play a role in protecting the polar bear's future and with them our own by becoming involved in our communities and working to change systems. So this means that we have to vote with the climate in mind and to support civic leaders who understand the importance of addressing climate change and who want to commit to making renewable energy the easy and the affordable choice across all communities. But in addition to this, I want to point out that simply talking about climate change is incredibly valuable. Yeah. So most people are just as worried about climate change as most of you are. But if we want to speed up that transition from fossil fuels to green energy, we need to start including the climate and climate change solutions in our everyday conversations. So, I mean, that could just mean simply telling your friends, family, colleagues about International Polar Bear Day, watching these webcasts with them, and telling them about what you've learned about polar bears and about the climate and about climate change solutions, right? So days like these, like International Polar Bear Day, they give us a chance to focus attention on the need to take action, right? So I'm very happy that you're all here with me. So we have time for a couple of questions more. I'll just see what I have here. What was the next one? Ooh, this one. All right, I'll do one of your questions and then I'll do my own. All right. So Ursus maritimus, which is a great, what do you call it? A great name because it means polar bear in Latin. Is asking, how good is a polar bear's vision when underwater? Whoops. So I don't believe anyone has actually done, a scientific study of this, of polar bear vision underwater. However, we know that, like, it's been documented that polar bears can absolutely assess where seals are on top of an ice floe, at the edge of an ice floe, when the polar bear is swimming in the water, underwater. So they must be able to actually see somehow, right? But my guess is that their vision underwater is the same as yours and mine, because their eyes are not specifically made for being underwater. But they are very good hunters and they're very skilled at hunting seals, even if they have to sneak up on them being partially submerged. Yeah. So there was let's see here. This is a polar bear question that I get quite often, and especially recently for some reason. Is it true, excuse me, I don't know if you noticed, but I've been talking nonstop for an hour, right? Is it true that polar bears have black skin underneath all the fur? And if so, why? Yeah. And I know you're probably wondering, what does this have to do with polar bear cubs? But hang on in there. So, yes, polar bears, absolutely, they do have black skin underneath all the fur. However, they're not born that way. Polar bear cubs are born with pink skin. Yeah. So they have that short white fuzz that I was talking about in the beginning. And because it's so short and sparse, that hair, it's very easy to see the pink skin of the bear, or of the bear cub. And this pink skin, it actually doesn't turn black until the age of 3 or 4 months. So that is at the time that the cubs emerge from their den together with their mom, right? So it actually goes from pink to black over the course of 3 to 4 months. And once it's black, you can easily, I think that's what KT was trying to show before with that picture, you can easily see the color of the bear's skin here on the nose, on the lips, and also, if you flipped it upside down, underneath the paws. So, why do polar bears have black skin? Well, the one thing I can say is that it appears that having black skin and dark eyes is apparently very important to the species, because we have never had a reported albino polar bear, not in the wild and not in zoos. So apparently this is something that is very rare in polar bears. And our best two hypotheses for why having black skin is essential to polar bears, they are both related to the sun. Which also makes sense in that, you know, the cubs go from pink to black skin before they emerge from the den, before they come out into the sun. So first off, dark colors are better at absorbing heat from the sun, which could be an advantage to a polar bear trying to stay warm in the cold Arctic. However, during the coldest months, during the dark winter months, there's not a lot of sun from anywhere to absorb. So this would only be working during, the summer, the spring and summer months. But it's a theory. It's a theory. And secondly, the dark color of the skin is likely better at protecting the bear against harmful UV radiation from the sun. So generally speaking, the higher the concentration of the dark pigment called melanin that is in the skin of any species, the better it is protected against the sun's UV rays. So this goes for an enormously wide range of organisms, from humans to blue whales. As an aside, whales can actually get a tan. How amazing is that, right? And that just goes to show that the higher concentration you have of this dark pigment, the better protected you are against the sun. So in the case of the polar bear, the sunlight it is exposed to is so intensified when it's reflected off of the snow and the sea ice and the water that, it would make sense for them to try and protect themselves, protect their skin from these harmful rays. Yeah. So if you want to see a picture of a polar bear, the dark skin, I'm not sure if we have one, but you can Google, what is it? You can Google it. Polar bear black skin. There's especially one picture of a bear that had an operation in a zoo that had an operation in its leg, and you can see that they shaved this big patch, and you can see the black skin underneath quite well. All right. So I think I need to be wrapping this up. I could go on forever and ever. I really appreciate all the questions. I appreciate you being here today. And I especially appreciate all your great polar bear questions. Yeah. So I hope that you learned more about polar bear moms and cubs today, and polar bears in general, and that you will help us continue to celebrate this International Polar Bear Day. Visit our website to learn more about International Polar Bear Day, about the webcast schedule, and about how you can get involved and help us protect polar bear moms and cubs. If you're interested, the next webcast is tomorrow, I believe. For me, here in Denmark, it's at, let's see, 6 or 7 p.m. But you can find all the information on our website. Other than that, I just want to thank you guys. I want to thank you, KT, for helping me behind the scenes. And I want to wish everyone a happy International Polar Bear Day.